Okay, moving on to the next team in the SEC that we will be going over today. That will be Tom Crean and the Georgia Bulldogs. Coach Crean will be entering his third season. And I'll say this about Georgia. I do think that the way this roster's patched together does tell me a lot about the way Tom Crean thinks of his team right now. And the reason I say that is because I totally understand that when you look at this Georgia roster, you're going to realize that from last year's squad that, let's keep in mind, didn't even come close to making the NCAA tournament. They lose Anthony Edwards, who was just the number one overall pick in the NBA draft. They lose Rashawn Hammonds, who's a fringe NBA player. He could really play. Donnell Gresham, Tyree Crump, Jordan Harris. So there was plenty of talent that this Georgia team actually lost from last year's squad. And now they bring in 3 JUCO transfers, including P.J. Horn, the transfer from Virginia Tech, Justin Kier, the transfer from George Mason, and Andrew Garcia, the transfer from Stony Brook. And Tom Crean right now is going to be entering his third year, and he's trying to rebuild Georgia. And look, I'm going to admit it. I don't think Tom Crean is per se a bad basketball coach. I think what he did at Marquette and even at Indiana, I think Indiana did let him go at the right time, but I don't think he did a bad job as the head coach of Indiana. I think sometimes Indiana fans are going to hate on him a little too much. I just think in that situation, it was better for both parties that they moved on. So Tom Crean spends 1 year off as a TV analyst, and he then gets the head coaching job at Georgia. And I feel like Tom Crean, since he's gotten to Georgia, hasn't done that great of a job. And I feel like last year, there were some pretty high expectations for Georgia, just because they brought in one of the best recruits in the country in Anthony Edwards. And even besides Edwards, I actually thought Georgia wasn't going to be too bad last year, just because of, besides Edwards even, the surrounding talent they had. I liked the kid Hammonds and Crump and Jordan Harris and even some of the guys they have on this year's squad. But my worry here is that by Georgia bringing in those 3 grad transfers, that tells me that Tom Crean and the rest of his staff must just not be that confident in guys who played last year improving. The first guy that comes to mind is Christian Brown. He's a guy that's going to be entering his sophomore season. He's a former top 100 recruit, and he averaged 3.4 points per game, 1.6 rebounds per game, and 0.2 assists per game. I think in order for Georgia to improve this season, he's going to have to improve this season. Same with Ty Fagan. He's going to be entering his junior year, played for Tom Crean all 3 years. He only averaged 4.1 points per game, 1.7 rebounds per game, and half an assist per game. I think that's going to be another guy that they're going to need to get better. Now, if you're a Georgia fan, there is some room for optimism, and I'll explain what it is. I think that your backcourt actually does have a chance to be pretty solid. You start off with Severe Wheeler, who's that little jitterbug point guard, and a lot of times, especially playing in the Power 6 in college basketball, that doesn't always work. But I do think Severe Wheeler is a legitimately good player, kind of a guy that will fit that Chris Chiolda mold before his career ends, and he was super dynamic last year while playing with Anthony Edwards. I remember they had a game against SMU, and they were down by 2 with like 10 seconds left, and he drove to the basket, and I was like, damn, how does that kid who's 5'10" just able to drive to the rim like that? So that was really impressive. He averaged 9 points per game and 2.5 rebounds per game last year. I was super impressed with what he was able to do, and I think he'll be ready to take an even bigger step forward this year. They also bring in a kid by the name of KD Johnson, the 6'1" freshman, and I am a really big fan of his. I think he could be a guy that when you look at this Georgia team, he's a top 100 4-star point guard, and he's coming to town, and he looks ready to contribute right away at the SEC level. He's very strong for his age and his height, and he's a guy who could be your lead guard, and he's very athletic, he's very quick, and he could jump. And one word to summarize his game is tenacious, because he works hard and really attacks the defense. I think when you combine that kind of player with Severe Wheeler, that's when playing a young point guard could really help you. They also bring in another point guard, a JUCO transfer, Mikal Starks. I'm not really too confident that he's going to see much action this season, but here's my thing. Edwards and Rashawn Hammonds are gone, and Georgia, I feel like when you look at the talent, there could be an argument that could be made, even though they lose Anthony Edwards, even though they do lose Rashawn Hammonds. Some people will say that they could be even better. But at the same time, I'm really not confident in that statement, just based on the amount of different things that have to go well in order for this Georgia team to succeed. You know what I mean? Because I think in order for Georgia to succeed, they're going to need not only Tom Crean to coach better, but they're going to need so many other guys to improve. And oh yeah, that's while also developing better chemistry between all of these grad transfers that Tom Crean brought in. If Georgia is so focused on Christian Brown and Ty Fagan getting better, guys who have played for Tom Crean before, why are they bringing 3-win grad transfers into the program? And I understand you lost a bunch of talent. I get it. But at the same time, that just tells me a lot about the way this Georgia program is right now. And if I was a Bulldog fan, I'm not going to lie, I would be pretty concerned because right now, Tom Crean is under pressure. I feel like with those moves, that tells me that not only Tom Crean is not confident, in those guys not improving, but at the same time, I don't think he's confident that his job is necessarily safe because this is only his third season at Georgia, and I understand that it's been 2 seasons and no one has expected Georgia to win March Madness or anything, but you would expect when you have a player as good and as talented as Anthony Edwards, along with another fringe NBA player in Rayshawn Hammonds, I'm not going to lie, I expected Georgia to be a little better last year, and they cannot this year finish with like a record in conference of 3-15, or else they're going to be in big trouble. And I like Anthony Edwards as a player, but I just think the fact that he wasn't really able to do anything last year, and Georgia as a team wasn't able to do anything last year with Anthony Edwards on the squad, then I'm just not necessarily sure then with this team how they would be even better. I mean, Georgia went 5-13 in SEC play last year. That just can't happen when you have the number 1 recruit on your team, and I feel like, to me, that just shows that Tom Crean, I'm not too confident that he's going to be able to get the job done, and I totally understand. I do think, once again, Tom Crean will get some unfair hate from Indiana fans. I don't think he did a bad job there, per se, during his tenure, but at the same time, I just think that when you look at this Georgia Bulldog squad, losing at home to Ole Miss by 10, losing at Missouri, losing to South Carolina at home by 16, those were the kind of losses that just can't happen, and I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to be able to avoid them this year because they have less talent in the squad last year, and right now, if I were to predict it, I'm going to predict Georgia to be the number 12 team in the SEC.